Hello. Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts is consistently ranked as one of the best institutions of higher education in the world. But it has another ranking of which to be less proud. It has come bottom in the league table published by the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, which ranks freedom of speech on campuses. Out of 100 points in the league table, Harvard managed to score 0, nul point. Not least due to 9 instances of academics at the university facing sanctions due to what they'd written or said. To discuss that, I'm joined by the Foundation's Director of Polling and Analytics, Sean Stevens, live from the United States. Sean, welcome to GB News. This is very shocking. I wonder whether you could give me some examples of academics who faced sanctions for things that they'd said or written.
So Harvard dropped, as you pointed out, they handled most of the speech controversies on their campus fairly poorly over the last 4 or 5 years. There's 2 disinvitations. One was Devin Buckley, a feminist scholar, who the academic department that invited her to speak then rescinded the invitation after controversy. There's another incident where the president of the school and the provost or the dean of the graduate school were doing a campus speech, giving an event, and protesters occupied the stage, refused to leave. They had to move the event to a different venue and restart it 30, 40 minutes later. And then you have, in the past few years, there's 3 scholars, including one who was a tenured professor who was fired for expression that we would consider protected under the First Amendment. And even though Harvard's a private institution, they've promised free expression, so they're contractually obligated to provide it.
It sounds then as though Harvard, and this may be an example of other universities as well, does not have proper safeguards in place. And that's presumably one of the things that you investigated in your analysis, the safeguards.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll say, we do evaluate the speech code policies, and those are part of the rankings. We actually only evaluate the speech code policies for students, so it doesn't even include the faculty yet. But yes, I would agree with that assessment that Harvard and a number of other schools have policies on the books that are the way we describe them is they're worded vaguely enough that they can be arbitrarily applied, and it seems like they are.
I have a question for you here, which is these institutions depend heavily on donors, on alumni. Mm-hmm. Is there any signs of protest amongst the donors and alumni saying these universities really do have to allow free speech if we're going to give you our legacy or continue to give you funds?
Yes, there is. We've been in contact with a handful of alumni organizations at schools like Harvard is one of them, and then at other schools like Harvard who don't feel they've performed well. There are alumni associations that are forming, fighting this issue, kind of bringing up this issue, putting pressure on the universities. So yes, there has been some signs in that realm.
Tell me how widespread this is. We've been talking about Harvard. Does it run through the Ivy League? Does it extend through campuses in the United States generally?
Yeah, so I think there's two different ways to answer that. There's the longer scope, which is FIRE's been around for almost 25 years, so I could speak to kind of what FIRE has seen in the two plus decades that's existed. And then we've also been collecting this data, like this kind of survey data, for the past 4 years. And so the common thread, I think, in both those buckets is, the elite schools and certainly the Ivy League, we would say, don't do very well on this issue. The highest performer in the Ivy League is Brown. They're ranked, I believe, 69th. So they're ranked around 70th. We rank 250 schools. That's not necessarily terrible, but it's not very good. And the rest of the Ivy League does pretty poorly. The University of Pennsylvania is the second worst school. Dartmouth is also in the bottom 10. Columbia was the worst school last year. They're ranked in around 215 this year out of 250. So across the board for the Ivies, they don't do very well on this issue. That's consistent with what we've seen as an organization for our 2+ decades of existence, where our lawyers write letters, we contact universities, we tell them, we try to put pressure on them, or we try to point out to them, we think you should resolve this controversy in this way. and a lot of times those elite schools tend to ignore because they have the large endowments and they can survive by, they're kind of like, we don't care. They seem to care now. It does seem like they care now, so that's a good thing.
I've got it. I think the research you're doing is very interesting, very valuable. Very pleased to give it publicity on GB News. Thank you very much to Sean Stevens.
Thanks.